Elena Ashwood had never owned anything beautiful. Not a dress, not a room, not even a name that people spoke with respect. She had grown up in the communal sleeping quarters of the Iron Moon Pack, sharing blankets with other children whose parents were also gone. Her father had been a border guard. He had died protecting land that never officially belonged to him. She had been 9 years old. No one had sat with her that night. No one had thought to. She grew up quietly. She learned the forest before she learned how to make friends, which was perhaps why the forest always felt safer. She knew which trees bent first before a storm. She knew which streams ran clean and which ones lied about it. She could follow a scent through rain and wind and the confused trails of a dozen other wolves, and she was 14 years old when she did it for the first time in a real patrol, finding a missing pup that 5 adult warriors had failed to locate. The pack leader at the time had nodded in her direction and said, "Good tracking." That was the whole of it. She had gone back to her small corner of the den and eaten her meal alone. Nobody looked at Elena Ashwood and saw anything important. She was average in height, quiet by habit, and she had the kind of face that people forgot easily, not because it was plain, but because she never put it in anyone's way. She did not push. She did not perform. She simply worked, and observed, and waited, without entirely knowing what she was waiting for. She found out on the night of the bonding ceremony, 3 years before this story begins in earnest. The bonding ceremony was the annual gathering where the moon goddess made her choices known, where fated pairs felt the invisible thread of connection snap into place, recognizable to every wolf by instinct, unmistakable as a heartbeat. Most bonds formed between wolves of similar rank. The moon goddess was not known for irony. And then the thread pulled Elena straight across the room to Kalen Voss, Alpha King of the Iron Moon Pack, newly crowned, tall and composed and surrounded by advisors, who all looked at Elena with barely hidden alarm. The entire hall went quiet. Kalen had looked at her for a long moment, really looked, the way he rarely allowed himself to look at anything, because kings are taught that looking too long at something signals wanting it, and wanting is weakness. Elena had stood very still in the middle of that silence and looked right back at him. She was not trying to be brave. She simply had no idea what else to do. He had stepped forward. He had said her name, and in that moment, she had felt something open in her chest, warm and certain, like a door swinging wide onto a lit room she had not known existed inside her. She had thought it was the beginning of something. She had been right. She simply did not know what kind of beginning it was. For 2 years, Elena tried to be what the court expected. She wore the formal clothes they gave her, attended the meetings she was told to attend, smiled at nobles who did not bother to learn her name. She was referred to, regularly and without malice, which made it worse, as the Alpha King's chosen, as though she were a piece of furniture that had been placed without full consideration and might yet be moved. She heard it so often that she began to hear it even when no one was saying it. Kalen was not cruel to her in those years. That was the thing she would turn over in her mind later, in the long, quiet months that followed. He was not cold, not dismissive, not deliberately unkind. There were evenings when he would sit with her in the library after the advisors had gone and talk about pack history, about the old laws, about things he could not say in council meetings because saying them would signal uncertainty, and kings could not afford uncertainty. He had laughed once, genuinely, at something she said, a dry observation about a particular noble who wore his formal collar so high, it appeared to be holding his chin up rather than the other way around. Kalen had laughed, and then looked briefly startled by the sound, as if he had forgotten he was capable of it. She had loved him, in the careful way that a person loves something they are not entirely sure loves them back. She had never asked him directly. She had been afraid of the answer. The answer came anyway, and it came in a great hall full of witnesses, which was a cruelty she did not think he had fully intended, but which was a cruelty nonetheless. She had come in from a training run, still in her patrol leathers, hair not yet brushed out, mud on her boots from the Eastern Trail. She had not been told there was a ceremony. She walked into the hall and found it full of every significant member of the pack, every noble family, every senior warrior, every elder. And Kalen was standing at the front of the room beside a woman in a white ceremonial gown, and Elena understood what was happening, before he said a single word. She understood. and she still stood and listened while he said it. I renounce my bond with Elena Ashwood. She is no longer my mate. She is no longer my queen. He was looking at a point just past her shoulder. He could not quite meet her eyes. She noticed this with a strange, detached clarity. The way your mind, when faced with something too large to process, fixes on small and certain details instead. His jaw was set, his hands were still. He had practiced this, or at least rehearsed the stillness of it. She did not scream. She had heard women in stories scream in moments like this, and she understood the impulse, but there was no part of her that wanted to give this room, these people who had never truly seen her, the satisfaction of her breaking open in front of them. She felt a tear leave her eye, just one. It tracked down her cheek and fell, and when it struck the stone floor, a thin crack spread outward from the impact like a spider's thread, 3 feet in each direction. No one mentioned it. Later she would wonder if they had seen it at all. She turned and walked out. The border post they sent her to was 4 hours' run from the main pack territory, north of the tree line where the winters came early and the summers barely bothered. She was given a patrol circuit, a sleeping pallet, and no further instruction. The 3 other wolves on her rotation treated her with the elaborate non-acknowledgement of people who have been told, without anyone saying it directly, that this is not a person to be associated with. She ran her circuit every day. She hunted. She tended her own wounds when the terrain gave her new ones. She slept when it was dark and woke when it was light, and did not let herself sit still for too long, because sitting still gave the grief too much room. In the evenings, though, she could not help it. She sat outside and looked at the moon, enormous up here above the tree line, nothing between it and her eyes. She talked to it, eventually, not in the formal way of prayer, not with ritual words, just talking, the way you talk to someone you have known so long that the conversation has no real beginning or end. I don't know what I was supposed to have done differently, she said, on one of those evenings. I don't know what I was missing. I would like to understand it. I think that's what bothers me most. Not the loss, the not understanding. The wind moved through the trees to her left, that was all. She kept running the circuit anyway. 7 months after the ceremony, at the river crossing just before dawn, they came for her. 6 wolves, moving in coordinated silence, trained, organized, purposeful. She heard the last one too late. She had been tracking the first, watching the third, and the last came from behind the eastern stones. She spun and engaged, and it cost her a silver-tipped blade through her left shoulder, which sent white-hot fire down her entire left side. She worked through it, the way her father had taught her before he died. Pain is information, not instruction. She used her right arm, her legs, her weight. She drove 2 of them off. She disarmed a third, and sent him into the river current. She fought until she genuinely could not fight any further, and then she fell at the water's edge, face turned up to the sky, the moon enormous above her, the cold of the ground spreading through her back. She thought, this is where it ends. And then she felt something that was not cold, and was not warm, and was not anything she had a word for. A presence, ancient and enormous, and unmistakably female, the way a mountain range is unmistakably old. You do not need to be told. It simply is, and you feel the fact of it in your body before your mind has time to frame the question. It did not speak in words. It communicated the way deep things communicate, in pure knowing, in understanding that arrives all at once. What it said, or what she understood it to say, was this: not here, not like this. You are not finished. Elena opened her eyes. The 2 remaining wolves were gone. The grass around her was white, bleached silver, in a perfect circle 3 feet in every direction. The river near her hand had frozen solid in late summer, a sheet of glass reaching bank to bank. Her shoulder had sealed, not healed slowly, sealed, as though it had never been opened. And when she looked at her reflection in the frozen water, her eyes, which had been brown her entire life, were silver. Bright and still and silver, like a full moon caught in still water. She sat up slowly. The forest was completely quiet. She stayed very still for a long moment, listening to that quiet, and then she stood up, because the border still needed running. Word travels fast in wolf packs. By the time it reached Kalen, it had grown in the telling. But the core of it did not need embellishment. Elena Ashwood had survived a six-wolf ambush alone. Her wound had sealed without treatment, and her eyes had changed color overnight. He knew what it meant. He had studied the old texts as a young man, before his advisors had suggested that certain volumes were perhaps too mystical to be useful reading for a future king. He knew the word for it. He knew what the moon goddess's law said about a bond that was abandoned rather than released. He knew the difference. He sat in the empty throne room for a very long time after the envoy left. He thought about 2 years of evenings in the library, about a woman who had memorized pack law as a child because she had wanted to understand the world she lived in, not because anyone had told her to. About a laugh she had drawn out of him that had surprised him with its realness. About a girl who had walked out of a hall full of people with a straight back and one silver tear and had not once looked behind her. He thought about what kind of man makes a calculation out of a person and calls it wisdom. He had no answer for that. He was not sure there was one. The full moon came 3 weeks later. The clearing at the heart of Iron Moon's old forest, the one that predated the pack, that every alpha had instinctively avoided claiming because something in it resisted ownership, lit up silver from below, from the ground itself, from the roots of things. Every wolf in the territory felt it, not an order, a pull, the kind that comes from something older than authority. They came through the trees in ones and twos, and then in groups, gathering at the edge of the clearing without quite knowing why, only knowing they needed to be there. Kalen came too. He stood at the back of the crowd. This had never happened in his life. A king, standing at the back. It felt correct in a way that nothing had felt correct in a long time. Elena stood at the center of the clearing. She was not performing anything. She was simply standing, the way she had always stood, without theater, without announcement, and the silver light rose around her like water rising around a stone. She looked settled. She looked, for the first time in all the years anyone in that crowd had known her, entirely like herself. Not a version of herself that had been adjusted for other people's comfort, just Elena, all of her. The presence filled the clearing the way a tide fills a bay, completely, all at once, with no space left unfilled. Every wolf felt it. Not frightening, something older than frightening. A weight of knowing, a truth arriving in their bodies before their minds had time to question it. And then the crown appeared, not gold, not metal, not anything made by hands. Woven light, silver white, and it settled on Elena's head with a sound like a single clear bell, rung once in a very large space. Pure, unhurried, completely certain. Every wolf in the clearing bowed. It was not a decision, it was a recognition. The kind that comes from somewhere below thought, somewhere instinctive, and old, and simply true. Kalen was the last to bow. He held it longest. Elena looked out across the clearing, and she did not look triumphant, and she did not look forgiving, and she did not look broken. She looked like someone who had been given, finally, the correct word for something she had always already been. In the years that came after, she did not take a throne. The crown she wore was not that kind of crown. Wolves came to her from packs she had never heard of, those who had been wrongfully cast aside, those who had been judged without fairness, those who had been unseen for so long they had begun to believe the unseen version of themselves was the true one. She heard every one of them. She remembered, clearly, what it was to speak to someone whose eyes slid past you while you talked. She never let her eyes slide. Kalen ruled for many more years. He became, by the account of most who lived under him, a more careful king than he had been before. More deliberate, more willing to sit with a decision until he truly understood it, rather than making the calculation quickly and calling it strength. Whether this was enough is not the kind of question a story can honestly answer. What a story can say is this. On every full moon, the clearing at the heart of Iron Moon's old forest still glowed, and Elena was always there, and wolves always came, and she always listened. She had always been good at listening. It had just taken a very long time for the right person to notice.